So let's hop over, like I said, real quick, and I'm going to go over to the vSphere client. And since we did talk about the two tools earlier, just to point it out, I will be spending the entire day today, unless something goes horribly wrong that I need to fix. We'll be spending the whole day in the web client. Now, almost everything we're going to look at, and I can't actually think of anything today that we can't do in the regular client if we keep our virtual machines at version, I believe it's 9. It might even be 8. We'll talk about virtual machine versions in a little bit. With 5.5, the default is to create a version 10 virtual machine. And if we create that virtual machine using version 10, you cannot edit, you cannot manage that virtual machine anymore in the old client. So actually all the virtual machines that we're going to be using today, they are all version 10 because they were all created through the web client. I do generally practice what I preach here. So these have all been created through the web client. Now some of the templates that we'll deploy later may not be. And those you could still manage in the old client. Okay, so the biggest thing that we would be doing today that you cannot do in the old client would be managing these new version virtual machines. So let's go into one of these virtual machines here, and to actually see it, just to show you a quick intro here, these are the virtual machines I have up and running right now. This one right here is, of course, the vCenter server itself. I do have that running as a virtual machine. So I do hope you understand as we go through today that that's one that we will not be messing with. We'll be leaving him alone so we don't break everything. Actually, we have a question here. It says, does this mean that we are bound to create version 10 VMs? Absolutely not. No. That is going to be the default, but we'll see as we go through and create a new virtual machine here in a couple minutes. But no, absolutely not. We can create whatever version we want. It's just that the default, if you just click your way through, it's going to make a version 10. So it's the default, but it is not at all a requirement. We are not bound to do that. We don't have to. But that is the default. So these are the three main VMs we're going to be working with today when it comes to editing them, but we'll be making a bunch more as we go. So we're going to pick on this 2K81, and it's just called that because it's running server 2008 inside of it. So we'll really just call these 1, 2, and 3. Okay. If you want to go look at this, you can click on this. You can see what it's using. We're going to get back to all of this, not to worry. But if you go to the summary tab here, and you look down here under storage, you can see where its files are being stored. And since we're talking about files right now, this is where we're going to head. Okay. And the nice thing with any GUI, and the web client here is of course no exception, there's a lot of ways to get to things. If I want to look at the files on shared 1 here, which is the name of our data store, if I wanted to click, I can click on it here and go over there and it'll take me right to the files. But notice that all it did is take me to the storage tab and then to that data store and then to the files section under manage files. So it's just a shortcut to take me to the right place in the GUI. Somebody asked here, is that the default via the web client, not the normal client? And that would be correct, yes, because the normal client can't even do version 10. Right. The normal client, like I said, I forget honestly off the top of my head if it makes a version 9 or a version 10. I'm sorry, it can't make 10. If it's version 9 or version 8. I believe the standalone client can do version 9. We can test this. I mean, I have the standard client installed in case we needed it. So if we want to mess around with it a little bit, when we get to creating a virtual machine, we can certainly explore that and figure out exactly which version the old client will go to, left to the defaults. Okay, but no, yeah, the default of 10 is only for the web client here. Okay, so this is looking at the directory structure of our storage. So here are the files for lab 2K81. So if I open this up, we're going to see most of the files that we addressed on the slide there, okay? So here's that VMX file, okay? And like I said, there's a couple other ones. There's an F file, and I'll be honest, I don't know what every single one of these files is off the top of my head. Like I said, some of them are just there for compatibility. If I were to take this folder and copy it over to Workstation and try to start this up under Workstation. So some of these files are needed by the other products, like Workstation or maybe Fusion need these other files. Okay, they're not all necessarily used by ESXi, but it will still create them in case you transport this to somewhere else. Okay, here's that swap file we were talking about, and actually that looks like an old one because this is actually the current swap file right here. These are the log files. Now the one that just says vmware.log, that is the current one being written to. The ones that have a number on them, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, those are historical logs. A new log file is created every time you power off, power on the virtual machine. So, and it keeps up to, I believe the default is 8 that it keeps, and then it just starts overwriting the older ones with the newer ones. If you open up one of these, I think it'll let you do it here. If not, I'll do it from the other tool. Now, see here, all you can really do is download. I'll show you another tool here in a minute. I talked about this a little bit in some of the other courses, and of course we need to bring it up in this one as well, is this is a way to look at the files on your data store. Honestly, it's not the best. The reason, well, I mean, let's look at our choices for a second here. I can upload a file to the data store, I can refresh my view, I can create a new folder, or I can delete something. If you want to download something, maybe I want this file, we'll take the newest log that's not current, so we'll take 0, and I want this file. Right click, download from data store. Now, I don't like to be picky, but why isn't download from data store another choice up here next to upload? I don't know. I don't write it. So this one, download from data store, and this will just do a typical, of course this is asking me, this is that client integration plugin. So this is my browser asking me if I better say yes. And this just actually brought it up on my other screen there, sorry. But it's going to ask me where I want to put this. I can just dump it right to my desktop. Okay, and it'll give me a status down here that it's downloading it. This one, again, is not on our list. This is a lock file. VMware uses this to indicate that these files are in use. That way, remember this is shared storage. So multiple hosts can see these same files. This is basically how it indicates that this virtual machine is powered on and running right now. So notice that it's putting a lock on the VMX file. If we were to look at a virtual machine that is not powered on right now, and it's actually not on shared, I actually have one on local, the local storage. I have a virtual machine, this one, that's not powered on right now, okay, and notice it does not have a lock file, okay. So this is how VMware locks the files so that another host knows that it can't try to power up this virtual machine, okay. It sees that file, this one right here, as locked. Notice, I mean, it's 0K, there's nothing in it, okay. I have on very, very rare occasion had a host just crash, and that lock file doesn't get deleted. What VMFS is supposed to do, and VMFS, of course, is the file system that this is all running on here. What VMFS is supposed to do is there's this lock file, and there's also actual file locks, okay, which are behind the scenes in the file system. those locks are automatically cleared, okay? The data store, VMFS, watches those locks. In fact, those locks, actually, the way it works is when a host claims a file. So it claims, you know, the VMDK file here. And it says, I'm opening that file. Okay. When it opens that file, it puts a lock on it in VMFS. That lock has an expiration. That lock will time out. Okay. It's up to the host that's using the file to keep refreshing it. So the idea is, and this is going to become important when we get to some of our high availability later today or in the next one of the upcoming sections. When we get to features like high availability, if a host just poof dies, obviously it's not going to go clean all this up. It's not going to release the locks on the files. It's not going to delete that .lck file. High availability needs to be able to fire this virtual machine up on another host. So those locks need to get released. So like I said, the file locks on VMFS, they take care of themselves because they'll just time out. And it's, I don't remember off the top of my head the timers on that. I want to say it's 10 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. It's not incredibly long. It's not like it's going to take 10 minutes to clear those locks. It's down in the order of, you know, a minute or so or less. So it's relatively quick that it's going to clear those locks. And HA will actually ignore that LCK file. So it can actually boot the machine even with that .lck file on there. But HA is the only thing I'm aware of that can actually bypass that, just in case it gets left behind. But I have run into in the past that a host dies, you know, you're not running HA, and you try to fire up a virtual machine manually on another host, and it tells you that it can't start it because it's locked. If you run into that, you come in here and you delete that LCK file. You just have to come in here and manually delete it, and then the virtual machine will start right up. Okay, because again, the file locks would have already been cleared. Okay, it's just that .lck, and it uses that too on if you're using NFS storage. It has to use that .lck because NFS does support a file locking mechanism, but my understanding, unless they've updated it, you know, one of those secret little, you know, didn't make the release notes, but they did it anyway, you know. Unless they have modified VMware that I'm not aware of, it does not use the NFS locking mechanism. Like I said, at least it didn't last I checked into it. I have not checked on 5.5, so there could be, you know, they may have made that change that I'm not aware of. But now, the other main thing I want to show you here, by the way, somebody posted a question here. What is the .HLog? It's very small. That's what it is. No, honestly, that one, I honestly don't know what that one is off the top of my head. That's not one of the common files. So that one, I would have to look that one up myself as well. I honestly do not know what the HLog is. Okay. By the way, one other word of advice, if I could please give it to you. Don't come in here and start deleting files. Oh my goodness, I've had people do that. And then of course they call you and want to know if you can recover their virtual machine. No, you deleted the files, and I'm not saying there's one out there. I don't know every single product on the planet. There wasn't one last I looked, but again, once I don't get up every morning and check. I am not aware of a VMFS file recovery utility. So when you delete something, I'm not aware of a way to recover it. There's no recycle bin, that's for sure. So you'd be talking third-party utility. You'd have to mount, I guess, that VMFS drive or volume or, again, I'm not aware of one. And I'm not saying there isn't. I can't, say there's no such thing as something because somebody could have released something yesterday or, heck, somebody could have released something 5 years ago and I've just never heard of it. But yeah, don't come in here and start deleting files. The biggest one is those snapshot files. I've had people come in, oh my goodness, look how big these files are. I don't even know what that is. Just delete that. Oh boy. And then of course I get the, can you recover? No. You can, we can rebuild the virtual machine and restore it from backup, because I'm sure you have a backup of that virtual machine, right? I mean, that's sort of where you're left with. So, don't come in here and start just deleting these files. VMware, like I said, they really sort of don't want you in here. The log files, yeah, okay, fine. The VMFX, leave it alone. If you see a file like .HLog, please Google it. Find out what it is before you decide, oh, I don't actually need that. Now here I'm in a lab environment, so I could just delete it and see if anything breaks. I'm not gonna. We had enough fun with breaking things yesterday. But this is what the files look like. But just to let you know, this is in a way lying to us here. This is the .vmdk, and notice that it lists the VMDK as 20 gigs, sorry. Okay, it's listing it as 20 gigs. Now, that file's 20 gigs. Now, if we go look at, I think, 2, if I look at virtual machine 2, I think his is going to be 40. Or it's not going to be able to read it at all. No, his is 20 as well. Okay. So I must have done these thin provisioned. I thought these were thick provisioned disks, but apparently they're not. Let's see if 3 is. Nope, 3 is not either. Another way you can tell, by the way, is you can right click, and if inflate is an option, then that means that it's a thin disk. And we'll talk more about thin and thick later. It was actually more of a topic in storage. But as we create disks and we go through creating a virtual machine, I'm going to talk about each of these things each step of the way as we go. That's going to be our main thing today, is going through step by step, talking about every option, every choice as we go through everything. That's going to be basically what we're going to try and do. Okay, but the point is, if you remember what I told you, the .vmdk is not 20 gigs. Be it thin or thick or whatever it is, that is not the size of that file. Okay? So what we end up with virtual machine hard drives is a little bit of a dilemma. Let me explain that. Here, in this tool, oh, and by the way, if we were using the old vSphere client, it does the exact same thing. So this applies to both clients. This file is shown here as 20 gigs, and we know that that's actually a -flat.vmdk. But you don't see a -flat.vmdk here. It's not even shown. So you can't even see it, okay? So again, I said it a minute ago, VMware, this tool is sort of lying to you a bit. It's showing it to you in a friendly way, okay? And what's actually very nice about this is it shows us how much is actually being used, okay? Again, if I look at, let's go back to virtual machine 1 because that was our focus here. This guy's right now using 20 gigs. But if I go back and look at the virtual machine and I actually look at his hard drive, well, I didn't have to expand it, it was right there, okay? He's actually has the capability of using 40 gigs. This is how we know it's a thin disk. He's been allocated 40 gigs of storage. So the operating system, if I go into Windows, it thinks it has a 40 gig hard drive. However, it has actually only written 20 gigs to that. So it's only actually taking up 20 gigs on my storage. And what's nice is if I come back over here, it does in fact show it that way. So you can come over here and you can see literally how much space that VMDK is taking up. The problem, like I said, is that that's not really the whole file, okay? There is one other small problem I have with this client, at least in this version. I'm hoping they'll fix it. I mentioned, and it'll be on one of our it'll be on one of our slides later as a way to do this, but I mentioned copying virtual machines, okay? And I have done this numerous times, and again, it's so great. VMware's portability is just outstanding, One example that I always like to tell people about, just to put this in perspective about moving virtual machines, about 4 years ago or so, I actually moved to Florida. And while I was moving, I had at the time, I don't bother with this anymore. We all have cloud now and everything, right? But at the time, I was running my own email server for my consulting company. And, I don't want to lose emails, but on the other hand, I'm moving and all my servers are going to be shut off for, at least a week. By the time I shut them down, pack up everything, where I used to live, move to Florida, unpack everything, get everything all set back up, get everything back up and running again. I don't want my email server down for a week. So I have a friend of mine who works for a school, and I said, hey, is it okay if I host my email server in your environment for a while? And again, what's great about this is, my email server is virtualized. I literally just copy the files, move them, take them on a hard drive over to his place. We copy them onto his server and boot my email server up. Now, obviously, we had to, do some name changing, DNS changing, obvious things like that. But ultimately, within an hour of downtime, I had my email server back up and running on a completely different server, moved my physical server, moved all my physical equipment down to Florida, set everything back up once I had everything set back up. Now, this was a little bit more downtime because in this example, I didn't have a local hard drive to just copy it over. I had to copy it over the internet, but I still copied the virtual machine files from his environment down to mine, fired it back up. There's all the email, everything's fine, reset DNS. This is why I love the portability. Now, that said, part of that whole process you heard was to download the virtual machine. Well, that means to get this folder and all these files in it. Okay, so if I go back to shared and I go to this folder and I right click, notice there's no download from data store on a folder. There's not a way to do it through the web client. At least, like I said, not yet. So I consider that sort of a downside. At this point, you have two ways you can go, the way I see it. Number one is I could go back to the old vSphere client, and it has a completely different data store browser to look at the files on the data store. So it has a completely different browser, and it, in fact, will download a folder. No problem. Okay? However, in my experience with it, and it has gotten better over the years, in its defense, it has gotten better. But still doesn't really change this, that in my experience, it's not the fastest thing in the world. I've gone to copy virtual machines with it, they're 40 gigs, and it's saying it's going to take 3 days. Like, I'm on a gigabit network copying 40 gigs. I mean, I could see an hour, hour and a half, something in that ballpark maybe, 3 days. And it's not lying. If you let it sit there and run, it takes, and like I said, it's a lot better now. So I would say today it would probably say 3 hours instead of 3 days. The old version, it was really bad. So the data store, the old data store browser is a little bit notorious for, or famous, for not being the fastest thing in the world. So another thing we would do is turn on SSH for the host, okay? The way you can do that is if you come over here to one of the hosts and you go to, I never do it through here, I always do it through the console. It's easier through the console, but you can do it in here somewhere too. It's under settings, I think it's under security profile, I believe. Okay, this first part up the top, by the way, is to configure the host firewall. And this is some stuff we're not really going to be getting into in this course. But you do have to make sure the SSH server would be allowed. So there it is, TCP port 22. But more importantly, you need to come down here under services. You would hit edit. You would go to SSH, and it would be off by default. The hosts do not default to SSH running. I've just already done this part, okay? And you set it up in here, and you say to start and stop with host, and then you'd have to manually start it if this is the first time you're doing it, okay? Just to let you know, if you do enable SSH and the ESXi shell, the ESXi shell is a way to get to the command line through the console. And again, we're not really getting into managing the host today. However, that just lets you get to the command line through the direct console. It's I haven't used it for a while because I always use SSH. I think it's Alt F1, I believe, to switch over to the ESXi shell, and then Alt F2 to switch back to the regular ASCII menu type system. But if you turn either one of these on, VMware considers that a bit of a security risk. So what will happen is under summary for the host, you'll get yellow warnings show up. I think they're here. They're either up at the top or down here right underneath. I forget exactly where that one shows up. In the web client, I've had warnings show up at the top up here and at the bottom under here. But either way, there'll be a yellow bar, and it'll tell you that, oh, the shell has been enabled, letting you know this has happened. Well, if you're the one who turned on the shell because you want it on, I don't think you want to get yelled at every day when you come in here that the shell's on. Okay, so I'll give you save you one little Google search here today, how to turn that off. You go back to manage. Okay, you go back in here, you go to settings, and you go to, now this of course I usually do through the old, here we go, advanced system settings. And it's, I gotta see if I can find it in here. I always do this through the old client because I know right where it is. Hopefully it's under user, yeah, it should be under user variables. Here we go. User variables, suppress shell warning, that one right there. So user variables, suppress shell warning, you edit that value, it will default to a 0, you change it to a 1. And it will stop yelling at you that SSH and or the ESXi shell is enabled, okay? So if that's not something you want to do, then you can skip everything I just said. But I like it because what I do then is I'll switch over here to my other tool. First off, it lets you do a couple things, right? First off, I could do this. I can actually connect right into the shell using like secure CRT. And there we go, I'm in the shell of the host. Okay, so again, we're not really getting into command line and all that today, but this is one of the things that allows with the SSH, obviously. Okay, so you can SSH in, but more importantly, what's more relevant to what we're doing right this second is I can use a tool, and I like WinSCP. You can use your favorite SCP client. Any of them will work. But what I've done here is I've navigated to the exact same place we already were. Actually, you know what? To show you how to get here, let me back all the way out. When you first connect to the host, you're going to get this, which, if you're familiar with Linux, or Unix, looks very familiar, right? Okay, because VMware will tell you that ESXi is not based on Linux. Okay. Yeah, they wrote it themselves, but let's just say if it's not based on Linux, it's incredibly Linux-like. How about that? But in any case, what you're looking for our discussion to get to the data stores is you're going to go into VMFS here. You're going to go to volumes. Under volumes, it's going to have these big, long, sort of ugly names. Those are the real folders, okay? But in the interest of being kind, what they've done is they also create links here, the equivalent of a shortcut in Windows, right? But these are Linux type style links that take you to the unfriendly name. So if you look at our path up here, right now it says VMFS volumes. I'm going to double click shared, but I'm going to end up with the big long ugly name. So the good news is you don't have to know the big long ugly name on the file system for each data store. And then if I want to download lab2k81, I just drag it over here. I'm not going to right now. It's running and it's locked, so I would have file copy issues anyway. Okay, you cannot copy it while it's actually running. Okay, with this method of moving a virtual machine, and this would be from like one environment to another, like I said, from my consulting business network over to my friend's network, and then later back. Two completely different environments. You're going to be down to like a file copy like this, or an export. You can always export to an OVA, and we'll talk about that later as well. I'm just showing you different choices. That's what we're here for, right? Different ways of doing it. Now, the disadvantage of coming in this way is when I look at that flat file, notice it lists it as 40 gigs. It shows it as its full inflated size. Okay? And a lot of people say, yeah, but if you actually copy it, now I got news for you. If you actually copy it, it's 40 gigs. It actually expands it on the copy. Okay? The only way I am aware of to get a thin disk from one environment to another and still have it thin and have it thin the whole time, including through the transportation, is to actually export it to an OVA, like I said, and then import it on the other side. If you do that, it'll keep the thin disk. But if you in any other way copy it, run it through VMware Converter, any of those other things, it expands the disk. And I would end up with that disk at 40 gigs, okay? Which would cause me to copy twice as much data as I needed to through, whatever means it is that I'm using to copy the files. But the main reason I like coming in here is if you are going to copy it, like I said, it's going to have to expand anyway. So you might as well do it through this tool. This is going to be considerably faster than the client. And it's also nice because it actually shows you that it's actually the -flat.vmdk for the hard drive, and that the VMDK is really nothing more than a text file. And I should be able to open this. I'll edit it. It should open it in a text editor. You can see here that that VMDK file is really nothing more than it trying to tell the geometry of the hard drive. Hey, let's pretend that thing has 5,221 cylinders, 255 heads, 63 sectors. I don't know, do any of you guys go back long enough that when you added a hard drive to a computer, you had to actually go into the BIOS and tell it that stuff? We used to have to know this, This information used to have to be printed on the top of the hard drive, or you'd have to go, look it up in the book or whatever, because, back that far back, we didn't really have the internet. This, of course, is, like I said, it's really just a pointer, and you can see right here, you can see where it's telling you what the real file is. So our virtual machine configuration file is going to point to this VMDK. The VMDK then defines the disk, okay, and points to the flat file. If we take a look at the VMX file, and again, I'll just edit that in a text editor. If we go down, oh, you know what? I just saw this. There's what that VMXF is. Yeah, I forgot they did that. They started adding some configuration to an extended config file. And again, I think it has to do with compatibility. So that if other versions don't understand the extended config file, they can just ignore it. Believe is why they did that. But if we scroll down here, and you can see there's a lot of stuff in here. But we should be able to find the pointer for the hard drive. And I'm probably looking right past it. I'm good at that. There's pointing to the NVRAM file. Just search for VMDK, huh? Here we go. I knew as soon as I decided to search for it that I would find it. Okay, so there you can see that the config file for the virtual machine actually points to the VMDK, and then the VMDK points to the flat dash flat.vmdk. All right, now again, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time in this file. As you can see, I mentioned earlier, it is just a big text file, and if you knew every single thing that was supposed to go in here, you could write this from scratch in Notepad. Have fun with that, and good luck, and we'll see your new virtual machine in like 3 months probably, but and I'm just kidding. But I mean, technically you could.